Hi, everyone. I just wanted to go over a little bit of Chapter 5 with the extended definition essays because I know some of you have been asking me questions about specifically what is an extended definition essay? Is it informative essay? Is it something else? And yeah, I'm just going to walk through a little bit of this chapter with the model and the organizational structure so that you guys have a little bit of an idea of what exactly it is and how to structure it. Um, yeah, so um, an extended definition essay is a type of informative or expository essay. You're essentially asking a question, what is something? You're basically defining something, a term. In the model, it chooses to define language. Now, usually when you write an extended definition essay, usually you pick a topic that is a bit more abstract and has a bit more of a complex definition. If you pick something like a table, well, that's pretty easy to describe. So something that like a table is that's a concrete object, a concrete thing, whereas something more abstract like love, education, friendship, life. Those are all more things that have more abstract definitions. And that way you can actually write an essay about it. Whereas a table, you could, like the text says, some things just have a definition that's pretty simple and there's not a lot to it. But something like life or love or marriage or education, friendship, those more complex um, concepts, ideas, is something that you would want to choose to write your essay about so that you have more to write about. So you can see here, chapter 2 focused on classification. That's what we looked at last week. As you will see, a definition also involves classification. Definition plays two roles. The first and primary role devotes an entire essay to exploring the meaning of a word, phrase, or idea. That keyword is exploring, okay? So an expanded definition essay, you're really just diving into the complexities of that meaning and kind of picking it apart. Whereas if you write a traditional informative essay about something, you're not necessarily diving into the meaning of just one word. Like if you're writing an informational essay about something in biology, then you're probably talking about a lot of different systems and concepts and how they all fit together. But really, um, think of an extended definition essay as kind of an analysis of what that word means. So if I were to ask you, what is life? What is love? Um, you would probably be able, I mean, you could definitely go to a dictionary and find the meaning, but there's so much more than what the surface level definition means. And that's kind of what we want you to explore in this essay. Um, so I'm just going to read through this model, analyzing the model. What is language? So obviously, this author wrote about language and what language is. So let's just kind of unpack this. You'll notice that this essay aligns with the outline on page 96. Okay, so we'll look at the outline a little bit later. Here's the outline, but it matches with this essay, so it's helpful to look at these two together. Anyway, let's just read through this. So the introduction starts out, we all speak it and we all write it, but what exactly is it? Okay, so there's the hook. That's kind of, okay, what are they talking about? They're hooking you in. The Longman Advanced American Dictionary defines language as a system of communication by written or spoken words which is used by people of a particular country or area. While in general this definition is useful, it is also far too limited. It refers only to people in one country or area, not to all people everywhere. So you'll notice right away the author states the dictionary definition and they immediately mention, okay, this is far too simple. This is a lot more of a complex idea or word. And they kind of pointed out some of the flaws with the definition, right? So they're saying that um, it's spoken by only a certain amount of people in a certain area, and that's far too limiting. It refers only to people in one country or area. So that's what they're talking about. Okay, furthermore, It does not explain the system and ignores the fact that words alone are only a partial element of language. So they could just call out another flaw with the definition. They're saying that this definition limits language to simply words, spoken words, written words. The argument, the arrangement and form of words. Okay, so I'm reading here. The arrangement and form of words, and often other nonverbal signals, also convey meaning. So think about when you talk to someone, you use your hands, you use your facial expression. The author is arguing that that is also language. However, that isn't embodied in the previous definition. So continuing reading, clearly, language is more complex than merely writing and speaking, and therefore must involve a deeper set of processes operating in the human brain. What are these processes and where do they come from? So here's the thesis statement right here. Language is more complex than merely writing and speaking. Okay, so at the dictionary definition, that's basically what they're conveying. But the author is saying, hey, it's a lot more complex than that. It involves a deeper set of processes operating in the human brain. So that kind of gives us a little bit of an idea of where the author's going. The author's probably going to look at some different scientific, psychological, linguistic processes that happen, social processes that happen um, that involve language, okay? Because the author thinks that it's you can't define language without looking at those things. So that's where the extension comes from. We could just stop it here, right? A system of communication by written or spoken words in which is used by people of a particular country or area, but there's so much more to what language is, and that's the purpose of this essay, is to look at those processes that create language and look at the origins, so where they come from, how does language develop. All right, so that kind of gives you a good look at what you might include in your thesis statement. In your introduction, you'd probably want to have a hook, probably give a dictionary definition, explain maybe the shortcomings with that definition or the limitations of that definition, and then kind of project into what aspects of that definition that you're going to explore. Okay, and that would probably be your thesis statement. Now, moving on to the first body paragraph. In order to address these questions, so the question just asked about where and what it is, we need a broader definition of language, okay? And that's the purpose of this essay. According to Carol Wade and Carol Tavris, language is a system of rules combining elements that are essentially meaningless into utterances that communicate meaning. The elements are usually sounds, but they can also be gestures of American Sign Language or any other sign language, right? And other manual languages used by deaf and hearing impaired people. Because of language, we can refer not only to the here and now, but also to past and future events and to things and people who are not present. Woo, that was a long definition. You can see that whole chunk there is another definition that they decided to bring in. And now they continue with their own words. Thus, not only does language refer to these things and events, but also to abstract concepts that cannot be seen or heard, such as love, loyalty, democracy, and Einstein's general theory of relativity. These concepts exist only in our minds. So in a sense, language makes them part of our reality. So, what's the topic of this paragraph, you might ask? Well, you can see that the author decided to bring in a second dictionary definition, which I highly recommend. There's all kinds of dictionaries out there, all kinds of textbooks, academic articles, research, where you could find probably 10, 20 different definitions of what language actually is. And bringing in another definition might help support something that you're trying to expand on. It might contrast to a previous definition, or it might help expand what you've already stated. And we can see this definition brings in more information about how language is not simply what's spoken, but also what is communicated through signs for people that are deaf. Um, so like using your hand signals to communicate something, but also it doesn't just do that. It talks about that language can communicate things that happened in the past, present, and future. So um, if I'm standing here with you, and basically they're explaining the concept that if I'm standing here with you and say, look at that tree, it's green, Language is also the capacity to talk about abstract things, like things that happened in the past. So, events that happened in the past. For example, you can tell me about what you did yesterday, um, which isn't included in the original definition at the beginning. Or you can express your thoughts on things like love and and loyalty, or anything basically abstract, which shows that language can communicate things that are abstract. So through this paragraph, the author is arguing for a more broad definition, which is what this essay is all about, to show that language is not simply what the first definition provided, but it's a lot more complex than the original definition. Um, okay, so this next paragraph is about symbols. So, such a reference to things, people, events, and abstract concepts occurs through the use of symbols. Symbols represent things, but they are not the things themselves. For example, we can see a picture of a chair and immediately recognize what the picture represents. Language, therefore, is distinctly human ability to identify and shape our world. So here we see another extension of what language is, okay, using symbols as evidence. Language is distinctly human ability to identify and shape our world. Um, Animals make sounds that may reveal fear, anger, and emotions, but as far as we know, they cannot communicate abstract thoughts. So they're using this idea of symbols to help back up their points, but also showing that animals are limited in their communication abilities. I mean, symbols, that's stuff like you're going to the bathroom. There's a symbol of a boy, there's a symbol of a girl. That helps communicate to you which bathroom you should go into. Or if you're texting your friend on WhatsApp, you might use an emoji that communicates a certain emotion, and that is a symbol. So this through this paragraph, the author is basically expanding the definition further to say that language is not limited to just words. It's not limited to just actions. It's not limited to to abstract thoughts about things that were in the future or that were in the past or can be in the future, but also symbols, right? Um, you think of road signs, any type of sign, really, any type of symbol that you would use in a text or something. So they're saying that that is also language, which helps expand the definition. Okay, the next paragraph. This is where we start getting into the more scientific things that they mentioned earlier about the brain and the processes involved in language. This broader definition is nonetheless limited, however, for it does not answer the question of how we acquire language. Okay, so everything up to this point was just what language is. Now they're answering that part of how it's acquired. Linguists, specialists in the study and use of languages have offered many explanations. For example, at one time, most psychologists assumed that children acquired language by imitating adults and paying attention when adults corrected their mistakes, from Wade 2011. This belief was explored by Noam Chomsky, who argues that language was far too complex to be learned bit by bit, as one might learn the list of world capitals. That's also from Wade 2011. Instead, Chomsky believes that humans are born with a capacity to learn language because their brains are programmed with what he calls a universal grammar. In an interview with John Gledman, Chomsky defines the term as the sum total of all the imputable principles that heredity builds into the language organ. These principles cover grammar, speech sounds, and meaning. Put differently, universal grammar is the inherited genetic endowment that makes it possible for us to speak and learn languages. In short, humans are born with a set of rules for acquiring languages that apply to any language they are exposed to. Okay, so this goes and answers the question, the second part of the thesis statement that was said, what are these processes and where do they come from? Um, and obviously, this isn't something you're probably just going to know. This person had to go do research, as all the other things here. So, this is really important for this essay and really any informational essay that you go and do research and teach yourself. So, whatever term you decide to define, go and do your research, okay? Try to look up different aspects of it so that you can come to your essay with some substantial concepts, details, examples to dive deeper into and expand on. Okay, now I'm just for the sake of time for this video, I'm not going to continue the rest of this essay, but you can see that the next paragraph, while most linguists and psychologists today agree with Chomsky's general idea, experts differ on how to explain the origin of universal grammar. So based on that topic sentence, we know that the author is about to tell us about someone that has different views, which when you're giving an extended definition of something, it's good to include all the different perspectives that someone might hold about something. So this is like this paragraph is obviously going to show a kind of a comparative theory that differs from what Noam Chomsky brought up, and you can read that on your own time about what Charles Darwin and Pinker explains about language. And we come to our conclusion. So it's kind of, you'll notice it kind of summarizes um, the thesis statement and some of the main points here, and comes to a kind of a conclusive definition. So what exactly is language then, and where does it come from? The answer is that language represents and creates our reality through symbols. Human beings have evolved into speaking and writing and signing creatures through a long process of evolution that makes us ready to acquire language at birth. Although languages differ greatly throughout the world, our brains possess a universal grammar that prepares us to communicate in any of them. Language is what makes us human. So you'll see here, this kind of is a concise definition of everything that was explored previously in the essay. And there's a kind of clincher right there that I always talk about. Language is what makes us human. So that might be kind of a more existential definition or whatnot. But yeah, so hopefully this was helpful to help you see the nuances between an extended definition essay and an informative essay, and how really an extended definition essay really is an informative essay. You're just basically revealing the information to your reader through the lens of answering of defining a term like language or education or marriage or whatever it may be. Um, so let's see here. If you guys scroll down, make sure you answer these questions. These will help you kind of make sure that you understand everything you need to understand about it. And then when you go down here, you'll see kind of the organizational structure that you can apply in the introduction paragraph, the body paragraphs, and the concluding paragraphs. I basically just walked you through those, but yeah, so please look through that on your own time and see how you can maybe construct your own format and what exactly you would want to use. So keep in mind, you're basically introducing the term, you're giving a definition, you're introducing the limitations of that definition, providing a thesis statement, then you're unpacking it. You can provide another definition provided from a different source and kind of compare those. Use that definition to either expand or contrast the previous definition. Look at some other aspects that you want to unpack. Like, remember, they unpacked symbols, they unpacked heredity and what Noam Chomsky thought and what Darwin thought and what Pinker thought, to help paint a whole picture of what language is. Now, obviously, this comes from a bit more of a postmodern scientific evolutionary view of language. If you were coming from a more biblical perspective, you would probably mention something about the Tower of Babel or something like that, or whatever you find in your research. But keep in mind that everyone sees the world a bit differently. And if you choose to define marriage, someone from a different worldview or belief might define marriage in a different way than yourself. Or someone from a different culture or belief or worldview might define happiness in a different way than yourself. Or education. So if you ask someone in America to define education and someone in Africa to define education, it might look a bit different because of the different systems and just yeah, I love extended definition essays because it just gives you a chance to explore on a deeper level what something really is, and just kind of analyze a topic and compare it to different other definitions that someone else might have. When you go through the rest of the chapter, you'll see there's different ways to define a term. You can use synonyms to help define. You can look at that chart, basically using like a positive interjections to kind of clarify or bring perspective to a term. Um, you can use a formal dictionary definition to help define something. Um, and then you can even define something by showing the opposite of something. So if you're trying to define happiness, you could um, explain depression and use what the opposite, because depression is the opposite of happiness, right? So when happiness is void, when happiness is not there, then you have something else. What is that? Well, depression explain you can explain happiness through explaining what happiness isn't, if that makes any sense. um, yeah, and then here's just some problems you can run into: making a category too broad, making the distinguishing information too vague. So basically, making it too broad, or making the definition circular. Basically, you don't really arrive to some conclusion. um, so we don't. Yeah, and then expanding your definition. Here's another just example using the model about symbols, how they explain, okay, this is what symbols are. This is what an example of that looks like in the real world. Here's how it looks like with animals, and just kind of expanding it, giving you some ideas on how to expand that. Now, keep in mind, I want you guys to use at least one direct quote and one paraphrased quotation in your essay this week. So please read this carefully about paraphrasing um, and giving direct quotes. Um, you want to make sure that it flows well and that you provide enough context and background information that your quotes and your paraphrasing doesn't seem random. The This model essay actually gives you a really great example of how to integrate direct quotes. Like, for example, at one time, most psychologists, so you can see there's no, it's grammatically correct, it flows well, and that's the case with all of the integrated quotes here. So please go back and look up how they integrated these quotes to get some ideas on how to do that. This is actually a quote. This is what we call a block quote. Um, and also keep in mind that this model paragraph is not, or this model essay is not APA format. So when you do your in-text citations, it will actually look a little bit different, but it's pretty much very similar. So um, I hope this was helpful. If you have any other questions, please, please, please reach out to me or your tutor. This is hard stuff, guys. It's not easy, especially when we get into the kind of the nuances and the specifics of different types of informational essays and how to differentiate between, oh, what's informational, what's persuasive, what's classification, or what's extended definition. I don't understand the difference between them. That's a totally normal response, and that's okay. But hopefully this video helped, and make sure you read carefully through this chapter, and I think we will all be able to figure this out together. Um, all right. Well, happy writing. I'm excited to read your extended definition essays this next week. Keep in mind that they are due Sunday at midnight. Okay. Please do not start it this weekend. Please start it this week, and make sure that you're spending some intentional time on the revision and editing process so that you guys can crank out a stellar essay for me this weekend. All right. Love you guys. Bye.